All right, guys, welcome to Wide Awake News Radio. I am Charlie McGrath. It is the 13th day of, almost said January, of February, Wednesday, and we got a great program lined up for you tonight. Joining me, hour number one, Mike Rivero, founder of whatreallyhappened.com, as well as a fellow radio host. He's going to be joining us here in just a second. And coming up, hour number two, Gary Franchi of the Next News Network. He'll be joining me for the second hour. I'm going to bring Mike on right now because, I want to get his take a little bit on the State of the Union. I know that on his program today, he said he talked about the Dorner mystery bullet or the next magic bullet. So we're going to get into that as well. But Mike, welcome back welcome to the program. I think it's the first time I've actually had you on the program. Mike and I have worked. Karen likes to pair you and me together on the United We Strike. I had a power outage and I couldn't make the scheduled slot with you this Saturday. However, I did join him for the roundtable at the end, and I've never met anybody that could literally out-talk me. And Mike, you can. So when
thank you, I think.
Well, I mean, this is why you do your radio program, because you're good at talking. And when we have 27 minutes together there, it almost turns into, are we going to each get 13 and a half minutes, or is it going to be, I think you and I could probably do 2 hours of radio. Not that I'm volunteering either one of us for that, for the United We Strike weekend, but I'm pretty sure we could do 2 hours and it would be a piece of cake. But Mike Rivero, founder of whatreallyhappened.com, welcome to Wide Awake News Radio.
Well, thank you for having me.
Very good. And people are, well, let me announce this. If you're listening and not in the chat room, you want to join the folks in chat, wideawakenews.com. Click on the microphone on the right-hand side. That'll take you right into chat. If you want to watch Michael and myself do this thing live, you can access the Justin TV feed from there. We have about 45-ish in the chat room and just a handful on Justin TV. Looks like about 15. I don't know if this counts even right on my Justin TV deal. But if you want to join him, you know where to go. Jump in there. Post your questions and comments for Michael or myself in there, and we'll do our best to address them. All right, State of the Union. I asked you a little bit about that. I was doing my program during the State of the Union last night, although RT had me on yesterday to talk about, it's like any political event, right? The script is released well in advance, right? They want to test it out. They want to make sure it's going to push all the right buttons, the right focus groups are placated, and so it's no mystery what's going to come rolling out of the mouth of our so-called representatives. But in this, they wanted to talk. RT wanted to know my thought on why it was going to be focused on domestic events and domestic issues, rather, such as the middle class. I truly believe that, Mike, we're heading into this March 1st deadline. The notion that we fix the fiscal cliff or the debt ceiling issue is put to bed. That isn't true whatsoever. I mean, all they did is they took it and they kicked down the road about 60 days. It's going to hit on March 1st. I think that they wanted to establish a message domestically that we are on the road to recovery. The president even said he's reduced the deficit by projected trillions of dollars, and we're on the right path, and set us up for this event that's coming March 1st that is going to end in one of two ways, which is either more debt being piled onto the people of the country and the world, or we will see, this true crisis of reality unleashed, which would be massive cuts across the board. But it goes to show that, well, let me put it this way. I almost think what we need now, Mike, and this is where the question to you. Do you agree with me on this? I almost believe that we're at the point that the people around you in Hawaii, which I'm jealous of you being there, the people around you in Hawaii, the people around me here in Montana, the people across this nation, unfortunately, the vast majority of them, and I'm going to say, there's been somewhat of an awakening, but I'm going to still say conservatively 90% completely oblivious to the true financial condition of our country, the true shaky ground that we're on, the thin ice that we're on. I almost believe we need that it would be the best thing for the republic to have this uber crisis of reality to shake people out of their coma and realize that it is the Federal Reserve buying $1 trillion a year of our debt, 95% of all debt issued, that is keeping this thing running. We need this shock to the system to wake people up. Your thoughts on that and your take on what you've seen so far that came out of the State of the Union address.
Well, I think the vast majority of Americans understand something has gone horribly wrong with the nation, its an economy. They may not be able to analyze it and explain it, but I don't think they're completely oblivious to the fact they've seen their paychecks shrink. They've seen their high-paying jobs vanish to take low-paying jobs. They're drowning in student loan debt, variable rate mortgages. They know there's a problem. They may not yet have understood exactly what the source is. And of course, we're seeing a lot of propaganda coming from the corporate media to say, oh, it's all the fault of Iran. It's the fault of the space aliens. It's whatever. It's basically ducking the blame when very obviously we're looking at epidemic Wall Street fraud. They openly admit to it. The government is refusing to investigate and prosecute. And behind it all, of course, we do have this private central bank, the Federal Reserve, which basically is running this gigantic 100-year-old pyramid scheme where it keeps going only as long as they can find more people to borrow money, to create new money, part of which is used to pay the interest on the old money. But it does build up debt faster than it builds up the money supply. There is always more money owed to the private central bank than is actually in existence, and that's why it's a debt trap. And sooner or later, every pyramid collapses, and we're basically at that point right now. So we see the money junkies in Washington, D.C. desperate to really get a world war going as a distraction so they can blame all the crash and hardship. Oh, it's the war. You know, this is wartime, and that's why you're all hungry and suffering and there's such shortages. It's just another way of ducking the blame.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, setting up the war excuse, certainly. I mean, come on, man. We have the North Koreans, you know, we're being told they set off another nuclear bomb the day before this speech. This did get turned into we have to worry about Ahmadinejad and the Iranians achieving nuclear nation status. The entire Middle East and North Africa is at a boiling point right now because they're immersed in depression, because they have foreign invaders on their land. You know, it would be an easy thing to have a Gulf of Tonkin somewhere in the Mediterranean and start World War III to just divert the blame of a cascading failure in the global financial system. I agree with you 100%.
Well, you need to understand that wars are never started for just one reason, and having an excuse to dump all the problems onto is only part of it. The other part of it, of course, is that when there's a war, governments realistically expect their population to endure greater hardship, be more obedient, less questioning. But ultimately, all wars are about economics. All wars are ultimately bankers' wars. And if you want to know why we're on this path right now, you need to understand that every time this Ponzi scheme banking system starts to lock up, they get into a world war to get out of it. Crash of 1907, get into World War I. Crash of 1929 led to World War II. Crash of 2008, we've already invaded, 10 countries on 2 continents. Yeah. Technically, we're already in a world war. As far as a big bang to really ramp it up to where everybody says, oh, yes, we're in big mistake number 3, I would be very worried about this conclave that we're going to see the first part of March to elect a new pope, because it's an almost golden opportunity for CIA or Mossad to drop a bomb on the Sistine Chapel, kill off all the cardinals, anger all the Christians, blame it on Iran, and get all the Christians and Muslims fighting each other. But the ultimate root cause of all of these invasions we're seeing all comes down to money. And I know we don't have a lot of time today, but I want to go back and recap what this is really all about. And if you go back to the end of World War II, the price that America demanded from Great Britain to enter World War II was for the British pound to give away its place as the international trade and reserve currency of the day and allow the dollar to take over. So when World War II was over, all of the main financial nations met together at this luxury resort in New Hampshire called Bretton Woods, and they hammered out this agreement where the dollar would be the new international trade and reserve currency. And all of the nations signed onto this agreement on 2 conditions. The first was that the government of the United States would not overprint these dollars so that they could loot real products and resources from these other countries for ink and paper. And second, and most importantly, the U.S. dollar would always be convertible back to gold at $35 an ounce. Well, as soon as...
Oh, sorry, Mike. I knew that was going to happen. We'll pick it up on the backside of this break with Bretton Woods. we wouldn't overprint the dollar, and it would be a gold-backed currency. We're going to be back with Mike Rivero, founder of WhatReallyHappened.com. We're going to be right back. Hang tight. Guys, welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. Charlie McGrath joined by Michael Rivero. He is the founder of WhatReallyHappened.com. He also has a radio program by the same name that he will give us the time and location where you can check that out. He was educating us a little bit on how we got into this pickle, how the United States got into World War II. It was a promise that the pound sterling would no longer be the global currency and the U.S. dollar would. And as he rightly pointed out at Bretton Woods, the agreement was forged with the notion that the United States would not overprint this U.S. dollar, and it would be maintained as a currency that was backed by gold. Continue, please. We cut you off for the break there.
Well, as soon as the ink was dry on the Bretton Woods Agreement, the Federal Reserve, which is not part of the federal government and not answerable to them, started to overprint the dollars and did, in fact, start sending these freshly printed dollars to other countries in exchange for products and resources. And a lot of the post-war boom was actually because of this little scam. It was a way of collecting an imperial tax from around the globe. So you get into the 1970s, and France is looking at this huge stack of paper notes that are building up in their banks over there. And they notify the U.S. government they're going to exercise their option under Bretton Woods to send these dollars back and have them converted to gold bullion at $35 an ounce. And Richard Nixon takes a look at that big stack of paper that's accumulated in the French banks and realizes there isn't enough gold to cover it. So he temporarily suspended gold convertibility. Of course, it was actually permanent, and that functionally ended Bretton Woods in terms of its, gold-backed support.
1971, correct?
1971. So the dollar started to take a major plunge internationally, and because there was obviously a shortage of gold in the United States vaults, Richard Nixon was forced to collateralize government borrowing with public lands. And that's where that whole EPA and wetlands river and heritage zones and roadless areas, all of these land grabs where American public lands were being cordoned off from the American people. And it was all done under the guise of environmentalism. But what was really going on is those lands were being pledged as collateral on additional U.S. government borrowing. So what the U.S. government then did is they went out to all the oil-producing nations in the Middle East, and they said, we'll make you a deal. If you will sell your oil only for U.S. dollars, we'll make sure that Israel doesn't attack you. And this was called the petrodollar deal. And so anybody who wanted to buy oil from the Middle East would have to bring products and resources and goods to the United States to get these little paper tickets with which they could then go over and buy oil in the Middle East. And these Middle East oil nations would then take these dollars, reinvest them back in the United States, which is why they own so much over here. And it was a workable deal until Israel started attacking their neighbors. And every time Israel does that, the United States would say, well, we gave them permission. So it's not like we broke the petrodollar deal. I mean, we just saw that when Israel attacked Syria a week ago. And the U.S. said, oh, yes, we greenlit that, because they're trying to hold together that petrodollar deal. But we're seeing more and more nations saying they don't want to sell their oil for dollars because the dollars are rapidly becoming worthless. And every time they do, they get attacked. In 2002, Iraq got permission from the United Nations to sell their oil for euros instead of dollars. 2003, the U.S. invades, they lynch Saddam Hussein, and Iraq's oil is back on the market only for U.S. dollars. 2 years ago, Muammar Gaddafi was everybody's friend, reformed terrorist, doing wonderful infrastructure works in Libya. Then all of a sudden...
Gave up his weapons of mass destruction program.
Gave up his weapons of mass destruction. And then all of a sudden he says, we're going to have a state central bank to take care of the Libyan people. We're going to have our own trade currency, the gold dinar, actually made out of gold. And if you want to buy Libya's oil, you have to pay for it in gold dinars. And the rest of the African nations said, this is cool. That gold dinar looks a lot more reliable than the U.S. dollar. So the U.S. invades Libya. They kill Gaddafi. They destroyed the state bank. Nobody knows where the gold that was going to go into the gold dinars has disappeared to. And Libya now has a private central bank that issues all the public currency as a loan at interest, just the same as the United States of America. And we see this happening all across the globe. And the really sick irony is this style of banking is exactly the style of banking the United States fought a revolution to be free of 230-odd years ago.
Right.
And we can see after 100 years how much destruction it has brought down on the standard of living here in the United States. And yet our government still insists they're going to force this kind of banking on the rest of the world at the point of a bayonet. When they talk about clash of civilizations, what they really mean, it's a war between banking systems. Private central banking versus state banks. Value-based currency versus debt-based currency.
Yeah, no doubt about it. You know, very, very well said. I couldn't agree more. And we see the conflicts in North Africa spreading, right, to Mali now. Tunisia is going to come back into spotlight. You know, part of this petrodollar deal, and I believe that was Kissinger that brokered that, was that they would trade everything in U.S. dollars, and we would provide that protection, especially to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And we still see that, you know, isn't it ironic that Saudi Arabia is the only stable a nation in that region, but when you have an uprising during the Arab Spring and their neighbors are trying to demand more representative government, they're put down violently, and we don't say boo about it. You know, the United States just turns a blind eye. The mainstream media doesn't touch it. But when it happens in these other nations, you know, it's these freedom fighters. John McCain, you know, so-called war hero John McCain, said of the folks in Libya, the freedom fighters in Libya, that they're heroes and they deserve our admiration and our respect for freeing those people. Now, there was an Italian reporter who was speaking to one of the commanders of the freedom fighters who openly admitted that within 60 days of being in Libya, they were shooting at Americans in either Iraq or Afghanistan, you know, because they were part of the alleged Taliban. So the lies that will be sold to the people of the world to keep this system going are limitless. And I truly believe, Mike, they will pull this all down before they give up their power. We're going to be back with Mike Rivero, founder of whatreallyhappened.com, in just a few minutes. Hang tight. All right, guys, we have about 60 people in chat. If you want to join them, wideawakenews.com. Click on the microphone on the right-hand side. We continue our conversation with Mike Rivero of whatreallyhappened.com. I know he said when we went into break he wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on in North Africa, Mali. So go ahead, Mike.
Well, the general agenda for going into Africa, again, it's control of resources and mandating that those resources be sold only for U.S. dollars. But you're aware of this other little scandal that's been going on with the gold bullion that nations have deposited in the gold depository at the New York Federal Reserve, Bank of England, Bank of France. And all of a sudden, these nations are starting to ask for their gold back. And we're seeing a lot of foot dragging by these central banks. When Germany asked for their gold back from France and the New York Federal Reserve, France said it would take 5 years to get the gold bullion back. New York Federal Reserve said between 7 and 8 years. And then 1 week later, they invade Mali, France and the United States. Mali happens to be Africa's third largest gold producer. And up until that point, they've been selling most of their gold to China because China was sending over yuan, which Mali could then send back to China in exchange for high-quality manufactured goods. So it was a currency that had some value to it. And again, it's all down to the economics and control of resources. The United States has lost so much of its manufacturing. It got just completely in love with this idea of making money by gaming the financial system. And you can't really run an entire nation that way. So we don't have a lot of manufacturing. Nobody wants to buy our agricultural exports because of all the chemicals and the GMO that's in them. And so the U.S. is basically trying to recapitalize itself through conquest. And that's really what it comes down to.
How do you see this playing out? I mean, you know, I had Greg Hunter on last night of USA Watchdog, and investigative journalist his whole career, and the same people that were giving him a heads up of the 2008 collapse are giving the same kind of warnings they did in 2007 to him now about 2013 being a year where we have an oh my God moment in the financial system. Now, you don't have to look very far to see where an oh my God moment could occur. It could be politically, geopolitically, it could be domestically, internationally, certainly could be in the financial system. What do you see going forward in 2013 for the rest of this year?
Well, if I have to make a choice between seeing the economic system of the United States collapse and take the federal government with it versus letting this world war get into a truly nuclear situation, obviously I'm going to prefer collapse of the economy and the government. The pattern I would like to see emulated is the one that we saw in the former Soviet Union, where the Soviet government simply collapsed from its own internal rot and corruption. And the people of the Soviet Union finally said, you don't represent us. We're not going to listen to you anymore. Please go away. And it did happen with very little bloodshed. There was a few months of confusion, and then the new Russian republics formed. Their economy is doing very well. And I'd like to see the same thing happen here. As far as what that, oh my goodness, moment could be, we're hearing rumblings about a possible major stock sell-off before April. We know that Wall Street very foolishly and recklessly sold $90 trillion in credit default swaps, derivatives against Europe's debt. And they're doing everything they can to keep the European Union glued together and keep Greece from defaulting. But the European Union is definitely showing cracks. One of the reasons Germany may have asked for their gold bullion back is to be ready to issue a gold-backed Deutschmark as they break away from the European Union. Because right now, up until this point, France and Germany have been paying most of the costs of trying to hold the European Union together, with all these skyrocketing debts that were being created by the European Central Bank, which is their version of the Federal Reserve. But now France has gone into serious economic decline. They very foolishly raised their top tax rates to the point where their top earners, movie stars, athletes, whatever, are leaving for other countries. And that means France's ability to compete and stay on a par with Germany is being degraded. That gap between competitiveness between Germany and France is starting to widen. Germany has to be looking at that and saying this is a no-win situation for Germany. And I know Chancellor Merkel is all pro-European Union, and they're talking about wanting to start closer links with the United States and sort of unionize them as well. But the reality is the German people are fed up with this. They're tired of their taxes going up and their services going down. And we see that here in the United States of America. This whole thing about austerity, austerity, austerity. And the message is to the American people, you must make do with less so we, the government and bankers, can have more. That's getting to be a very, very hard sell. Now, you were talking earlier in the show about this looming March 1 deadline for the fiscal cliff. And Obama's already trying to float the idea of yet another interim deal to kick the can a little bit further down the road. Right. And yes, they're talking about tax increases and they're talking about cuts to spending, but it's always cuts to the spending for those things we pay taxes for: roads, schools, hospitals, police, fire, the things that are really draining the nation's economy, these trillions of dollars of bailouts to Wall Street and these endless wars. Nobody talks about cutting them. In fact, the whole fiscal cliff was about avoiding the mandated cuts to defense spending. So we're in a wartime economy. They don't want to admit it, but that's exactly where we are right now.
Yeah, and the sequester is supposed to happen March 1st. We'll see. You know, I don't trust the jargon from the left or the right one bit. I know when those cameras go off, the doors are closed. They will cut deals to protect the military and security industrial complex and to protect the banks. Everything else can go by the wayside. You're right on the austerity, austerity, austerity. This notion that we have to do with less so that the bankers can have more. In looking at Europe right now, and you see, first of all, there's this false calm over Europe that somehow their financial problems are abated or receding. That isn't true. It's exactly the opposite of that. You talk about Merkel being absolutely pro-EU. I wonder if, look, the sell job happened here already. The sell job that we're going to turn over the power of this country to the Federal Reserve. And if it didn't happen in 1913, it certainly happened in 2009, 2008. They have got power unlike they could probably ever dream of. They are the ones controlling the economy, which means they are the ones that can stop this on a dime and let this pain unravel. The question I've pondered on occasion and talked about is, are the people of Europe, all these nations, the 16 that use the euro as their currency, are they ready to give up complete and total sovereignty of their nation? Because that's what it means to have a powerful central bank, a powerful EU centered out of Brussels that dominate the financial interests of every nation that's involved in the EU. With those borders there, with sovereign nations, they can't do it. So we've seen this breakdown of governance inside of Europe. We've seen the replacement of leaders of government to be for technocrats to be installed. I do believe that this is the powers that be, the new world orders stumbling block right now is getting the folks in Europe very, very malleable. And Mike, they've shown that they'll go to any length to achieve this. People killing themselves out in front of Parliament. This is in the civilized West. I think that the power elite would absolutely stop the global economy if it meant making the populace beg for their solution, which is, global financial governance and more control, more power to fewer and fewer people. Your thoughts?
Well, the problem with that, of course, is that if the private central bankers simply cut off the money supply, everybody's going to stand up and say, okay, let's just make our own money. Yeah. In the era where I was coming up with school, where we were propagandized by the school that this is the only way the economy could possibly work, people might have believed, oh, we have to make the private central bankers happy if we're going to have currency. But more and more people are aware now. We had a completely different banking system when this nation was created. The government issued the currency.
That's right.
And countries that do that do get attacked historically. I wrote an article over at my website called All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, and it's gone viral around the net. My server's getting hit 1,000 reads a day on this thing right now. And basically, though, people are aware, yeah, we can come up with our own money. We don't need to borrow the money at interest from the banks. And that is why I think the biggest single mistake they made with the European Union is by starting it out with a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. They sort of had a built-in self-destruct mechanism, because if you want people to join a union or a global government, you have to make it look attractive and beneficial.
No doubt about it. Mike Rivero, we're going to be back with your thoughts on the magic bullet in our final segment. Mike Rivero, whatreallyhappened.com is the website. Check it out. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio, final segment of hour number one. We are joined with Michael Rivero of whatreallyhappened.com. He has put that story, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, that article back to the top of his page. I put it into the chat room. Please check it out. I mean, I think if you already understand the story and you know this stuff because you tune into alternative media all the time, take this article and send it out in mass email to everybody. So when we are led down the path of invading the next country to spread democracy or to save the people of that nation from tyranny, understand that we are the ones that are spreading tyranny in a lot of these cases, and we're doing it for reasons that are certainly not the reasons we're being told. Mike, with about 10 minutes or so left in this segment, you had said to me before the program that this shooting in Big Bear has all the markings of the JFK magic bullet, the whole situation. We talked about it a little bit last night. His background, immersed in the military, law enforcement, his whole upbringing. And it's not like he went in to the Navy as a swabby. He was an officer. He held some clearances. This guy was not somebody that you would think would put out the manifesto that was just glowing in gun control, glowing in the left-leaning issues, but that's certainly what he was made out to be. And in fact, I had said to somebody last night that it was extremely bizarre on how easy it was to access this manifesto. Usually when something goes down, people are pulling it down. It's hard to find. You got to dig a little bit. This thing was everywhere. His beliefs were broadcast everywhere over the news, including Anderson Cooper talking about a package he received and many others in media receiving so-called packages from this guy, setting the stage for the events that unfolded. But anyway, your take on it and the situation of him being burned down in the cabin.
Well, just in brief, and I'm going to start off on what may sound like kind of a tangent, but you need to understand that 90% of these mass shooters that are being waved at us to get us to go along with the gun ban were either on or withdrawing from prescription antidepressants, mostly SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And they have a long and well-documented history of provoking acts of extreme violence and suicide among a segment of the population that takes them. 10% of Americans are now on these things. That includes 10% of all police officers, at least 10% of all of our politicians. And if you go over to ssristories.com, you will see thousands and thousands of case studies. It's even in the industry literature. The pharmaceutical companies are saying in the little fine print package warning. Yes, you may experience thoughts of suicide. These drugs began pouring into the American society back in 2008, and at the same time, the incidence of these mass shootings, car rammings, spousal abuse, child abuse, police brutality all took off at the same time. I have to wonder, given that the firing of Christopher Dorner in 2007 happened all those years ago, and it took until 2013 for him to go postal on it, if he was not also on these medications. And the reason I ask that is you see these manifestos surface in a lot of these cases. And I think it's actually a symptom where people are on these medications, they're starting to feel these uncontrollable urges toward violence and suicide. Some part of their brain knows it's wrong, and they're writing out the manifestos trying to rationalize what's going on in their head because they don't understand they're dealing with a chemical issue. So I still think it's valid to ask if this guy was on these prescription antidepressants, because normally if he was wronged in 2007, by the end of 2008, he's going to have calmed down and it just fades into history. But all of a sudden, here we are, 2013, and it just erupts like that. That's not a normal psychological pattern and suggests pharmaceutical influence.
No,
now,
and I want you to finish. I thought we have time to do this, but I want to just interject it. That's extremely important, because every time we've talked about what happened in Aurora, what had happened in Connecticut, these individuals are undoubtedly on some kind of drug, some kind of psychotropic drug, or reuptake, serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Matthew Aaron Lanza, or I'm probably saying this wrong, Lanza, is the latest. He was charged with trying to blow up a U.S. bank down in Oakland. And, of course, the FBI set the whole thing up from start to finish. They gave him the explosives. They gave him, or the mock explosives, a mock detonator, and the vehicle to drive this 1,000-pound vehicle-borne bomb in front of there. And when he pushed it, the detonator cell phone, and it didn't go off, they arrested him as being a domestic terrorist. But his history, same exact thing. He was he was under psychiatric evaluation. He had a tendency for, or he had suicidal tendencies. A year earlier, he was put in prison for issuing threats against himself and his family. So exactly the same scenario where you have an individual who's just been bombarded by chemical overdose, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
and he's just very malleable and easy to turn into a maniac. And,
well,
and then
actually,
you don't know what is false flag. You don't know what is staged. You don't know what is, are they engineering these guys when they have them? In a lot of these cases, they're under clinical supervision. It begs the question: are they engineering these people to go out and commit these acts to propagate an agenda?
Well, one of the very common side effects of these medications is poor impulse control. Adam Lanza, who was the shooter up in Newtown, was reportedly on Fanapt, and the manufacturer's own warnings with the medication says that this is going to result in poor impulse control, extreme rage, extreme paranoia. There was one very well-documented case of an SSRI-induced attempted suicide. Young kid tried to kill himself. They got to him. They saved his life. When it was all over, they say, "Why'd you try and kill yourself?" And he says, "I don't know. It just popped into my head, and I went with it." And so if you have somebody who is on these medications, they can be talked into doing just about anything. And the Columbine shooters, one of those was known to be on these SSRIs. The other one's medical records are being withheld. Gee, I wonder why. But it is a major, major problem. Now, I know we're getting to the top of the hour. We're seeing a lot of spin coming out of this Christopher Dorner situation. There is without a doubt that this gentleman had a legitimate beef. He tried to report police brutality. We know police brutality in the LAPD and across the country is a major problem, and it's been getting worse, coincident with the infusion of these SSRIs into our population. How he reacted obviously was not correct, but it was very clear all along the LAPD did not want this man to have his day in court. And so we had this Waco-like ending in Big Bear yesterday. The audio tapes of the police radio have surfaced where they're openly talking about, we have in 7 burners position and we have a fire. Now, the LAPD is trying to claim that burner is police slang for tear gas, which doesn't really relate, but tear gas canisters are pyrotechnic devices, and it's known. If you shoot them into a wooden building, you are probably going to start a fire. And we've all heard the profanity that was coming out there where they were just screaming, burn the guy, burn the guy. Actually, the language was stronger. It was very obvious the LAPD absolutely did not want this guy to be taken alive, because then he would have gotten a public trial, and his manifesto and his gripes about LA police brutality would have had a public forum. And I used to live in Los Angeles. I remember the Rodney King beating. I remember Rampart. I was there when the entire Hollywood division was busted for running a 2-order burglary ring. When I was in college, the best source for dope was a California highway patrolman, was selling it out of the back of his squad car. I mean, it's a completely corrupted system. I had a half-brother who was with the LA County Sheriffs, and he was scary, running around with his gun and badge. He lived for the day he could shoot a minority. And he's not in the department any longer, so he's safe. But I mean, that kind of mindset is there. And there's always this rule: you don't rat out your fellow police officers. Kind of a real Serpico mentality.
Yeah, and you know, you're right. I tried to drop that video into chat. I must have done something wrong with the link. But you're right. There's no mistaking what they're doing. They're going to burn the guy. They're going to burn him up, and leave no witness, leave no testimony, nothing. And of course, when I got done with the program last night and I was surfing through trying to catch tidbits of that unbelievable State of the Union, every single news channel was glorifying the fact that he was dead. You know, and they would bring on expert after expert saying there's no other way this could have ended. You know, and how ironic. I mean, you mentioned Waco type thing, and that's the first thing it reminded me of. You know, they're pumping either tear gas in there to light this thing on fire, or who knows? You know, they lit a match to the thing. I do know that they prevented helicopters from news stations from being anywhere.
They kept the media out. They kept the media out. The websites you can go to listen to police radios all got shut down just before the cabin was set on fire. And what's really interesting is they're trying so hard to sell that it was Christopher Dorner in that cabin. Earlier this morning, they were claiming they'd found his wallet. Magic wallet, flame-proof material, same stuff they use for the passports at the World Trade Towers. And then, of course, when a certain broadcaster, webmaster, pointed out that they'd claimed to have gotten his wallet in San Diego last week, that part of the story has now disappeared. And they're saying, well, we think it's him, but I still have to do the dental records match.
Well, and didn't you say something about a magic bullet was even involved in this?
Well, the magic wallet.
Oh, the magic wallet. Okay.
The magic wallet, yeah.
Yeah. And I actually had a listener call me today, and she said that you know, the exact same thing you said. Just like the World Trade Center, all this debris, and you have a perfect little identification card there.
Yeah, the suspect is burned to a crisp, but his wallet is there with his driver's license intact. I mean, come on.
Yeah, no doubt about it. His website is whatreallyhappened.com. When is your program? When can we hear you?
I'm on the Republic Broadcasting Network Monday through Friday from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Central Time. 1
p.m. to 4 p.m. You're doing 3 hours a day.
Yes, I am.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work,
Coffee.
Michael.
Coffee is my secret.
No, your secret is you live in Hawaii. And that's
Kona
truly...
coffee.
Kona coffee. Well, I appreciate your effort. I appreciate your hard work, and I appreciate what you do every month at United We Strike. And I'm sorry I missed you. I missed you on Saturday for our glorious half-hour talk fest.
Well, we paid the ransom and we got you back, so all's well.
I do appreciate you paying that ransom. Give me back. We'll get you on again real soon. What really happened? Whatreallyhappened.com is his website, his program. You can find him on RBN. You said 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock Central Time?
Yes.
All right. Mike Rivero, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming on tonight. All right, guys, stay tuned. In just a few minutes here, we're going to come back with Gary Franchi. We're going to talk a little bit about his new project that he's working on. You know what? Maybe we're not. Maybe we're just going to roll through with Mike. I got my alarm going off here that we're should be going into. There it is. Finally, we've been messed up on our bumpers here the last couple of days. Guys, we're gonna be back in just a few minutes. Gary Franchi is going to be joining us. Stay tuned. We'll be right back in a few minutes.